Well, we're going to start. My name is Sheryl McNair, and I'm here from the Minnesota Board of Social Work. I'm the assistant director there, and we're going to talk about these things. Social work is a regulated profession. The board's mission, which is public protection, that's why we exist. The benefits of licensing and the requirements in Minnesota. The application and examination process, and supervised practice, continuing education, and ethical standards of practice. If you have questions, please raise your hand. And because we're being filmed, you can either use the mic or not, I guess. It's up to you if you have a question. We can give you a mic.
Would you like us to grab those?
Oh, yes. We have handouts of the PowerPoint. Sorry, I thought you might have taken them as you came in. The regulation of social work is relatively new. It's been around for a little over 20 years. And what you need to know is each state and the state law determines how and what you need to do to become licensed in that state. So some states have licensure, like Minnesota, but some have registration or certification. So it varies from state to state. And if you practice in more than one state, you may need to be licensed in more than one state. There's no national license. And so if you're moving to another state, you would need to talk to that state and see what their requirements would be. The Board of Social Work is a state regulatory agency. It's not your professional association. So there is the National Association of Social Worker, which is your advocacy group. Our job, once again, isn't to advocate for social workers, it's to protect the public. And we do this in many ways. We establish and enforce ethical practice standards. We license social workers and ensure competent practice. We take complaints from consumers and other professionals, and we provide information to the public. We have a little orange block on the homepage of our website, kind of a rectangle box that says verify a license, and someone can go to that and click on it and see if you happen to be licensed. So an employer, potential employer could do that, a client could do that, you can do that to see when your license becomes effective, even before we mail you out your license certificate. Our board has 15 board members appointed by the governor who serve 4-year terms. 5 are public members, 5 are bachelor's licensed social workers, and 5 are master's licensed social workers. They represent all areas of the state, many different practice settings according to sort of a complicated rubric that's set out in law, and also represent communities of color and have people on the board that have expertise in the area of communities of color. If you were going to call the board, you get board staff. And so that would be someone like myself or other staff that would answer the phone. You don't get a board member. They meet only 6 times a year and make policy decisions, and then board staff carry out their decisions. Licensing came into being in 1989 at the request of the profession, so social workers wanted licensing. Some benefits for the public are that if a client sees a licensed social worker, they can know that this person has a degree, a bachelor's or master's degree from a school accredited by the Council on Social Work Education. They would know that this person has passed a national licensing examination. They've had a criminal background check. They've met supervised practice requirements. They've had to answer ethical questions when they fill out an application or when they renew. And they would need continuing education on an ongoing basis. So that's sort of a minimum set of standards that a client can be guaranteed if they see a licensed social worker. There's some benefits for the professional also. Licensing helps to guarantee parity with other professions. It enhances professional identity and credibility. I know we have a board member who works for the county, and the county is a setting where licensure right now is voluntary, so he would not have to be licensed. And I know he's often said, I chose to be licensed because I frequently have to testify in a court of law. And the judge will look at me and say, and what are your credentials? What expertise do you have upon which you're testifying? And he said, I always like saying, I'm a licensed social worker. I've passed a national examination, all the things I just mentioned, because he said that really gives me, I believe, greater credibility in the eyes of the court. Also, there may be reimbursement for services for licensed social workers, depending on your license level and the insurance provider. So then, who must be licensed in Minnesota? We have a Social Work Practice Act that is both what we call a Title and a Practice Protection Act. And this is really important to know. You need to be licensed, not just if you use the title social worker. Matter of fact, I think probably the majority of positions, maybe you don't use the title social worker. You might be a case manager or care coordinator or facilitator, various titles. But we would have jurisdiction over both. The title really doesn't matter, as long as you're doing duties defined as social work practice in our law. So whether you call yourself a social worker or not, if you're doing duties described as social work practice and you hold a social work degree that's kind of the basis of your hire for that position and no other degree, you would need to be licensed. And then there's some settings that we call exempt settings. This means a license is not required in this setting, it's voluntary. And these are our current exempt settings. First of all, there would be internships. So when you do your internship, you fall into the jurisdiction of the school, not the Board of Social Work. Currently, city, county, and state social workers are exempt from licensing. So if you choose to work in one of those settings, licensure would be voluntary to you. It's important for you to know that we currently have some legislation that began moving forward last session and is being picked up again this session that could possibly modify or remove this exemption. And so you might want to kind of keep pace or keep checks on what's going on. Look at our website to see what the final outcome will be related to the exemptions at the end of the legislative session. Another exemption is social workers employed by federally recognized tribes, social workers employed by private nonprofit agencies with a minority focus and they are a member of that same minority, and other licensed professionals. Might do tasks, some of the same tasks that social workers do, but we don't regulate them. A nurse could be a case manager too, for example, but she would be responsible to the Board of Nursing, not the Board of Social Work. And one of the reasons I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, if you need to be licensed or not, is because the board has taken a harder line based on some language change in our law a couple years ago about enforcing what we call unauthorized or unlicensed practice. And that means, and if we become aware of the fact that you were working in a position where you needed to be licensed but weren't, the board can take action against you, and you might be referred to the compliance unit when we find that out. It might come out on an application that you submit saying, started working in this position 3 months ago and now I'm applying for licensure 3 months later. It might come out because a colleague or someone else has referred you, made a complaint against you. Technically, you are obligated to report other individuals who are engaged in unlicensed practice. So, you need to know when you need to be licensed. If you're practicing in Minnesota and not in an exempt setting, whether or not you use the title social worker or not, another title, doesn't really matter. And if you're doing duties in your position description, if some of the duties are matching the definition of social work in our law, and you hold a degree in social work, and that was kind of the basis of hire for your position. Job description might say a degree in a human services field. It doesn't need to specifically say a degree in social work. They write job descriptions very broadly, but if the only degree you have is in social work, and that's thus the human service degree, then you would need to be licensed.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying if they say they're requiring a human services degree, and even still, if the position that we're doing is a social work type position, then we have to be licensed?
Yes, unless you're in an exempt setting. So if you're working for a nonprofit agency, for example, you would need to be licensed. And an employer might tell you, and this is where people get, I think, kind of misled. They might say, you don't need a social work license to be working in this agency or in this position. And that's because they aren't really following the social work laws, number one. That's really, they're thinking more broadly. They're thinking, we're writing this job description. We might want to hire someone with a degree in psychology. They want a broad pool of hires. Maybe someone who has a background in social work would work. Maybe someone with background in nursing would work for the same position of case manager. So they're not thinking about your particular situation in that position. And that's what you need to be looking at. And so they may say, you don't need a license for this position. And then you think, do I or don't I? Maybe I do. And then you look at your position description, you look at the Practice Act, and if you need to consult with the board, you can certainly call us and ask. So it's kind of your responsibility. You can't say, oh, my boss said I didn't need to be licensed. That isn't, something that's going to get you out of.
So for those individuals who don't have a social work education, they may not need to be licensed.
Correct.
If we've had the degree, because there are
Correct.
jobs that we've had that could be, categorized as social work type.
Correct.
Because now we have this 4-year degree, we're obligated to become licensed.
Correct.
Even though previously the job would not require licensing.
Correct. It might have been, that it was experience that got you your foot in the door there. I don't know.
Right.
Or some other degree possibly. Now, if you have more than one degree, if you have dual degrees, then you could say, well, I'm really doing this work under my degree in psychology, not social work. But that, isn't the case for most people. Okay, so I wanted to spend some time with that because we really don't want your first experience when you apply for a license with the board to be, oh, whoops, you should have been licensed 6 months ago. Now we have to send you to compliance. And there could be a fine, and there could be some action taken that would become public action against your license. So, okay, so it's important then to know what is the definition of social work practice, because that's important for you to know. And where you find that is in our Practice Act, which is Minnesota Statutes 148E.010 are all the definitions. And the definition of general social work practice for bachelor's folks would be subdivision 11. And how you can get to this information on our website would be on the home page, there's a section called links. And then it says law/regulation. And if you click on that, it will take you right to 148E, and then you can look at just the particular section you're looking for and pull up one page and not have to scroll through a long statute. So you can get to the information easily. How many of you have been to our website? Raise your hand. If you haven't, I would encourage you to do that. There's another great resource on our website. It's a student handbook, and it's under the student section, or also under links, that same section where you can get to law regulation. It's under, I think it says brochures, reports. So either it's in two places, and there are some great resources in this handbook. The last page has a lot of phone numbers and email addresses and websites for places like the Association of Social Work Boards. That's the tester, the person that does the exam, Council on Social Work Education, NASW, the board's numbers. Also, there's information on the content of the exams on the next to the last page. Definition of social work practice is in here, I think, on maybe page 13, what I've been talking about, and just the steps that walk you through licensing. So this is just really a good resource to take a look at. We used to bring these out. This is the first year we're not bringing these out, we're not updating these, and things are changing too quickly, and we've decided to just make the changes in one place and have you go to our website to get an updated handbook. Okay, so if we're going to define social work practice, I don't know if some of you or any of you have looked at how it's defined in our law, but according to the work that you do, how would you define what you do? What does social work practice include? Raise your hand if you have some things. Social work practice is what? Yes?
Working for the people for the greater good.
Okay. It's actually, there's a phrase in our law that's very similar to what you said. A little more lofty, but very similar. Okay, what else? Yes?
Advocating for clients' rights.
Advocacy, good. What else? Yes?
Working within the community.
Community organization, community work, good. And it's broad definition, big definition. What else do social workers do? Counseling. Supportive counseling can be done by bachelor's licensed social workers. Psychotherapy cannot. So there's a distinction, and that can only be done by a master's level social worker. What else? Case management, good. Information and referral, education, psychosocial assessments, treatment plans. All of that, and most of that, is related to direct practice. Face-to-face work with clients. Our law also includes indirect practice. And this is where folks sometimes go astray. They say, well, I thought, I'm actually getting ahead of myself, but they thought that if I wasn't working in a setting where licensure is, they thought if I wasn't seeing clients face-to-face, I didn't need to be licensed. And our Practice Act also says if you are doing things like administration of a social service agency, a program director, even if you're not seeing clients face-to-face, policy work, educators teaching social work students, supervising social workers for licensing purposes or employment supervision. All of those things are also practice, and what we call them would be indirect practice. Research would be another example of that. So when you get a chance, take a look at the definition of social work practice in our law. And then we started getting into this a little bit, and that is the scope of the LSW or bachelor's license is limited in that you cannot do clinical work. And clinical work would then take you into diagnosis or psychotherapy. So those would be limitations on the bachelor's LSW license. You can only do that if you are a master's licensed social worker. Okay, so then regarding enforcement, the board has legal authority over individuals, if you're not working in an exempt agency, who use the title social worker or practice social work, even though they're not using the title, but their educational basis for the position is their CSWE accredited degree. So sort of a summary of what I said. And the board does not have legal authority over agencies, but can require licensure of individuals even when an agency does not require licensure. And the board enforces this. It's called unlicensed practice. We can reprimand someone. We can assess a civil penalty, such as a fine, and we can even, by law, issue a cease and desist order. We can say, you can't go to work tomorrow. You cannot go back to work until you hold a license. So the law has given us authority to keep people from being engaged in unlicensed practice. There are 4 licenses in Minnesota. The LSW licensed social worker license is the one you would be applying for. That's the bachelor's license. Then there's an entry-level master's license, the licensed graduate social worker license, the LGSW. And then once someone becomes an LGSW, they get on a track to either move towards an LISW, independent non-clinical license, or an LICSW, independent clinical license. And what drives kind of which way that master's person might move is their scope of practice, whether they're doing clinical work or not. If they're doing macro social work practice at the graduate level, generalist practice, then they would not be on the clinical track. They'd be on the LISW track. So then, requirements for the LSW license are a BSW degree, that you have taken and passed the Association of Social Work Board bachelor's examination. Have any of you applied for licensure yet with the Board of Social Work? Okay, taken the exam yet? And I would encourage all of you to do that now if you plan to stay in Minnesota, work in Minnesota, and be looking for a position in June, because you can take the exam, be ready to go when you graduate, so there won't be a time period when you can't start working yet or take a position. And right now, our office is getting a lot of applications in. So, you know, the students are starting to send things in, and what happens in the spring, both in our office in terms of turnaround time, and when you go to take the exam at a test site, they start to fill up, and there are longer waits and longer processing times that you will experience, because this is going to be our peak. Then once you are licensed, you must receive supervision for your first 4,000 hours of practice. That's 2 years of full-time practice. And then you can be done with your supervised practice requirement. You also need continuing education when you're licensed, 40 hours every 2 years or 24-month renewal cycle. And of those 40 hours, 2 need to be in ethics. And if you happen to be a licensing supervisor, which you might be down the road once you've met your own supervised practice requirement, then of the 46 hours would need to be in the area of supervision. So then,
Is there a difference between CEH and CEU?
No, they're the same. Continuing education hour equals continuing education in our minds. No. Your CEs are going to be within your renewal period, from the date you're licensed until the date you come up for renewal. And so during that time frame is when you get your CEs. And of the 40, 15 can be independent study, so independent reading, and not enough people utilize that. You know, so that's a way to get free CEUs. And that's another term we use for CEs, continuing education unit, CEU. So you must apply with the board to be licensed before you're allowed to take the examination. So this is important. You can't just call ASWB and say, I want to take the test. They'll say, we don't have your name from Minnesota yet. So you apply. You can apply online to become an LSW, and then you will get a letter back from us that says you've been approved to take the examination. Here's what you do next. And it's about it's usually a 30-day turnaround. It can be 30 to 45 during peak times. So then, a little bit about the examination. It's a national examination, and you're going to hear a lot more detail about this later, so I'm going to skip over this quickly. 150 questions on a computer. There are actually 170 that are given, but 20 of them are not scored, and they're just used towards future exams, possibly. 4 examinations that they offer that correspond to the 4 categories of licensing in Minnesota. You would be taking the bachelor's exam, which corresponds with the LSW license. And the content varies by examination. Passing score in Minnesota is 75. Now you may hear that, oh, passing score in another state is 70 or 80. It's all the same. Same number of questions that you would have had to have gotten right. I said some states have a different passing score, but it would be the same number of questions that you would have needed to have gotten right, whether North Dakota calls that 70 or Minnesota calls it 75. And a little bit like that, but not. Some of the test questions are weighted. So if it's a more difficult question, you will get more than 1 point possibly for that question. If it's an easier question, you might get less than 1 point for that question.
Will Are you going to talk more about the test in depth? Like, there's no essay, it's all multiple?
That's all multiple choice. And I think Mike's going to do that.
I'll actually be talking about that.
He'll give you some sample, probably questions and things, so a lot more detail. And according to our statute, you can't take the test more than 3 times. The majority of people do pass the first time. However, there is a provision in law, if you were to fail it a 3rd time, you could petition the board to consider that you take the test again and you kind of present your case. But that happens very rarely. If you do fail the exam, there is a 90-day waiting period before you can take the test again, and that's ASWB policy. And the idea behind that is that you need to take some time, maybe study something a little bit more before you come back and try again. ASWB contracts with Pearson VUE this for test administration, and this is a Bloomington company. So we started using, we'd been with ACT for many years, or ASWB had, and last January, a year ago, they contracted with Pearson VUE, and we seem to be having, people seem to be having good experience with Pearson VUE. Electronic test on a personal computer, and you'll find out the day you take it if you pass. 4 hours, usually that's plenty of time, people say. And the locations in Minnesota are Brooklyn Park, Eagan, Bloomington, Rochester, and Hermantown, which is outside of Duluth. ASWB has a link, I believe, to the Pearson VUE website, or you can go directly to the Pearson VUE website. You can click on your state. You can put in your zip code and find the 5 or 10 closest test sites to you. There's a lot of information on the Pearson VUE website. You can take the test in another state. That's all right, too. Take it in Florida when you're on vacation, you know, that's fine, it doesn't matter. The only state that does not recognize the ASWB examinations is California. They still do their own test if you happen to be moving to California. Most of the Canadian provinces also recognize the ASWB examination. So that's kind of the one standard thing across all states. It's available Monday through Saturday. And it's important to maintain exam security, meaning not to talk about details of, related to test questions. The reason for this is if there's a breach, I think it's about $1 million to create a new examination, and those fees will be passed down to future test takers to make up the loss. So it's really important to maintain exam security, not just for fees, but just for ethical reasons too. And we had new exams that were given. The bachelor's exam was a new exam last January 1st, 2011. So we've now had a year of experience with a new examination. Primarily, one of the changes was that the test categories were kind of condensed into a smaller number of categories than there had previously been. Every 5 to 7 years, ASWB does what they call a practice analysis. They send out questionnaires to people all over the country and the Canadian provinces to see what they're doing in their jobs. And based on how practice has changed over time, the test is adjusted. So it keeps up with changes in the field. What I've noticed through the years, you know, there are more questions about diversity, there are more questions about ethical practice. I think when I took the clinical exam years ago, it was 2% on ethics, and now it's maybe 11%. You know, so there are areas that over time have changed and shifted. The Advanced Generalist exam was held until January of 2012, so that new exam is just now being rolled out. And there's more information available about the test on ASWB's website than there used to be. There are now content outlines and knowledge, skills, and abilities lists. And their website is www.aswb.org. They have a study guide that you can purchase for $30. There's a practice test you can purchase and do online, which is very similar to the examination in that it's 4 hours, same format, that I believe costs $75. So there are things you can do if you want to do something further. And testing tips, it's just multiple choice reminders. Read a question carefully. What's the general topic? Hypothesize your answer, and then confirm or disconfirm your answer. Make sure you answer all questions, and if you get stuck, you can mark it electronically and go back to it. So don't spend too much time on one question. They're distractors that are purposefully put into multiple choice questions. Some of those could be that an answer is true but irrelevant, or too broad or too narrow, plausible but wrong. So when you choose an answer, these are just some reminders that ASWB says. Choose a comprehensive answer. If in doubt, favor the client over the agency. Choose an answer that preserves life. Think about who and where the client is. I think that's important. And know what your role is. Stay within the social worker role. Make sure that your answer meets confidentiality standards and doesn't support stereotypes. And don't read too much into the question or the scenario. There will be scenarios. And if it's an assessment, rule out a medical condition first. So those are just some general tips. I think another really important thing to remember is this is a national examination. So don't get hung up on, this is, if you've been working in an agency already or thinking about your internship, oh, this is what we would do in my agency in Minnesota. You need to kind of think more broadly. This is a general national examination. So then you would first submit an application to the Board of Social Work. That's what you do to get the ball rolling. And you can apply on our website using online services. That's the section you would go to get in. I believe we get about 85% of our applications online. You can also download a paper application if you choose to.
How much longer between the time you apply online? I mean, how early do you need to apply online to be able to take the test?
Turnaround time is going to be roughly 30 days, but it could be 30 to 45 days if it's first come, first serve as we're going through piles at peak times.
And then what's the turnaround time from when you give us the stamp of approval
You-
to the test time? I mean, is it pretty?
You get a letter to contact ASWB. You then pay them the fee. They then let you know how to contact Pearson VUE and give you a number to give them so you would be able to get in and register. And then it depends on how booked up the test site is that you're looking at. So there are some, some things determine how quickly you choose to move through the process, and then there might be some waits that you experience due to a busy time. You find out the day that you take the test if you pass it. We get those score reports once a week, and then that generates a letter that we would send out to you saying, congratulations, you passed. If you had already graduated, then we would say now you owe us X number of dollars for your license if we have your final transcript. What's most likely going to happen in your case, unless this is by the end of June or July when we would have that final transcript, in your cases it might be that we are holding then, we might know you passed, but you're not going to get any letter from us until we have your final transcript, because we still need that before we can license you.
So if I have my, I will graduate at the end of this month.
Okay.
But I won't walk until June, but you just need to.
If you're done with all your degree requirements, we ask that on the application, and then we're waiting for the final official transcript that needs to be sent from your school to the Board of Social Work.
And how long do you have? What's that window? I'm kind of got this situation where I was moved on into my social work classes. I still have 6 classes after I'm done with these. So I'm looking at a year of coursework that's not social work related. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm not sure. So when do you get your when do you get your official social work degree? Not for another year?
Not for another year, even though I'm done with my social work classes.
Okay. We keep an application open for 1 year. So you wouldn't want to apply yet.
So not any sooner before a year before the date I can provide my transcript.
Well, and you need to leave a little time after that because, you know, we need to get the transcript, and then you need to give us time to generate a letter for you and pay for your license. So that's the complete process: application, paying for the license
So I'm gonna want
after the
to wait
transcript.
well into the summer.
You'll have to kind of figure that out. And, I mean, worst case scenario, what happens is we close out your file. That doesn't mean you can't just apply again. You would lose a $45 application fee.
But I wouldn't have to retake it.
No. Okay, so this we're going to kind of go through step-by-step basis, but you apply at the board's website. You must complete all requirements within 1 year or your application closes out. Means you would need to reapply. And you may apply prior to completing degree requirements, or you may wait until after you're done. After graduation, it's up to you. And you must apply for licensure to be approved to take the examination. So that's just kind of a summary of what I've said. And then there are English as a second language and ADA accommodations in an application packet. So if those apply to you, make sure you fill out those forms. So here's kind of the step-through process. You submit an application, including a criminal background check. Even if you have done a criminal background check before, we ask that you do it again with the Board of Social Work. The fee is $45 application fee and $15 for a criminal background check, for a total of $60 that's submitted with that application. On your application, you'll report your graduation date. And I think the timeline we kind of talked about. Then we'll send you out an exam approval notice, and we'll direct you to a candidate handbook online. You'll contact the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB, to register and pay for the examination, and that fee is $230, and that goes to ASWB. You'll receive an email from them confirming your payment and registration, and they will direct you how to make an appointment with Pearson VUE to take the test. And if you fail the first time, there is that 90-day waiting period. If you have failed and you're still within the 1 year time period, you could let us know and apply again and retake the test, but you would not have to submit the $45 application fee again if you're still within that year. That one application fee that you had sent in the first time will carry you through a year. Then you complete all your degree requirements and contact your registrar to make sure that your degree has been posted, and request that they send the Board of Social Work your official transcript. And once we get the official transcript, we'll send you out an approval letter saying, now you owe us so much for your license. And this is projecting forward for a 2-year period. The license fee, LSW, is $81 for a 24-month period. So that's roughly maybe $3 a month, something like that. We get you on a renewal cycle of always renewing every 2 years in your birth month. So the first time you apply, we're going to be prorating things to get you to renew subsequently in your birth month every 2 years. So your first cycle, you might owe a little more or a little less than 81, depending on if it's 20 months rather than 24, or maybe 28 months. This first one is longer, than you would owe a little more. There's also an OET surcharge that is being charged on all professional licenses in the state of Minnesota. The legislature passed that to be in effect for 6 years, and it's just set up a one-stop enterprise technology online e-licensing portal for the state of Minnesota. So that's what that's all about. That's not really a board fee, but we're directed to collect it, and it's 10%. So that would be an additional $8.10.
I don't really want to mar the waters, but Jen, do you want to help me out with this? We learned that through the shutdown and all, there was this underground sort of thing that there may not even be licensing for the sunset. Do you remember them talking?
A law was passed during the last special session of the legislature where every board, well, actually every agency, state agency would need to be reviewed on a cyclical period. And the health licensing boards and the small consuls and smaller agencies were in the first round. And so we had to submit lengthy reports to the Sunset Commission, otherwise we would go out of existence, is the way it was written about the first group. DHS is going to be reviewed, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, Minnesota Management and Budget, every agency eventually. And we're just now, we've seen the final report, and it looks like, you know, they're recommending, Board of Social Work got glowing results. We're anticipating legislation is introduced to continue with our agency. That's what they have to do. Otherwise, we would have sunsetted as of June 30th, 2012, and then had 1 year to finish business. So it's a process to kind of streamline government. It's a process that's being done across the country. Texas model was what Minnesota was looking at, and it was to look at, you need to justify your reason to exist, is sort of the bottom line. And we were in the first group that is going through that, and we're feeling, you know, pretty good about how things went, but we haven't seen legislation introduced yet this session that, you know, says that we will continue, but we anticipate that will happen shortly. So yeah, an interesting experience. Lots of things, you know, when you work for a state agency come at you kind of unexpectedly. That was one of them. We didn't expect to be doing that at all last fall. Okay, so, but good for you to be kind of following that. And, you know, I'm impressed that you knew about that and we're tracking that, because that's really important to kind of keep on top. Now we have the exemptions is an issue that's coming up. And, yeah. Oh, I don't, yeah. I don't think they would get rid of licensing. So,
So if you are taking on like a 20-month cycle the first
Uh-huh.
time, are your do you lower the number of CUs you then?
Yes, yes, and those will be listed on your card. That would be prorated also. So you might need a few more than 40 or a few less.
Okay.
Good thinking. Okay, so then you submit your license fee. Your license becomes effective on the day we get your fee, and we'll send you out a license card and a wall certificate. And on your license card, it will tell you the number of continuing education hours you will owe down the road at your 2-year anniversary of your birth month. So that is the process. There is something called a temporary license. And the reason and purpose of a temporary license is to cover a gap that could occur if someone is done with their degree requirements, they pass the exam, but they don't have a transcript yet, and someone wants to hire them, and it's not an exempt setting. So then you would call the board and you would say, I need a temporary license. You're ineligible if you say, I started working 3 days ago and I now need a temporary license. If you say, I'm beginning a job next week on Monday and I need a temporary license, you would be eligible. So you are ineligible if you're already working at the time you apply for a temporary license. It's good for up to 6 months. You must have applied for a permanent license to be eligible for a temporary license. You must have passed the national examination, the bachelor's exam, and you're ineligible if you have already started and are engaged in what we would call unlicensed practice. You must have completed all your degree requirements also. There is a separate application form, and we turn those around very quickly, a few days, because we know people are going to need them. And you need to submit a $50 fee for a temporary license. Some of you will need them, some of you will not. We don't see, you know, the majority of people really don't need temporary licenses, but it's certainly there and useful for the folks that do need them so they can start a job or tell an employer, yes, I can come to work on Monday.
What's the turnaround time for that?
I said it's usually a few days, up to a week. I mean, we try to turn them around very quickly. Supervision is required under a temporary license, but the good thing about that is, so you submit a plan, it can apply towards your permanent supervised practice requirement too. And, you know, usually people get their transcript then in a couple months, and I see people rarely having to practice under a temporary license for the full 6 months. Okay, so that's kind of the process about how do you apply, a little bit about the exam. Any questions about all of that before we go on and look at kind of the continuing supervised practice and continuing education stuff?
What if you don't apply for a license, let's say like 2 years after you graduate? Are you still eligible?
You're eligible based on meeting the requirements at the time that you apply. You know, a law can always change, you know, so, you know, right now it would be that you hold an accredited bachelor's or master's degree in social work or doctorate in social work. You're eligible for a license in Minnesota. And then, you know, it's depending on the license you're applying for. If it's an independent license, you might need supervision or something like that. But for the LSW license, then you would be approved to take the exam. If you had already taken the exam, some folks do this and maybe think, oh, I know all the information now, I'm going to take the exam now, even though I know I'm going to go to Europe for and work in London for a year, I plan to come back to Minnesota. You could take the test. An examination score is good for up to 8 years. And you could just not pay the license fee, let your application kind of close out and never become licensed in Minnesota, but you would have applied and taken the examination. So there are some things, you know, that I see people do, but it often depends on what your particular plan is after you graduate. You can, sometimes people take, you know, the license test in Minnesota even though they know they're maybe going to move to Florida or something. You know, I have a fiance in Florida, will probably end up living in Florida. Then you would just have your score transferred from Minnesota, the exam score. ASWB, I think, charges $15 to transfer it to another state at a later date. But then you would contact Florida State to see what their license requirements would be. But you wouldn't have to take the exam again. Okay, supervision. You must have supervision for your first 2 years after you become an LICS or LSW. So 2 years of full-time practice is 4,000 hours. It needs to be formal and monthly and continuous. So you can't have like 10 hours of supervision 1 month, 2 hours the next, none 1 month. Then it needs to be kind of evenly distributed over the course of your practice. What you need is 100 hours of supervision over those 4,000 hours of practice to be complete with your requirement. That amounts to 4 hours of supervision per month for full-time practice for 24 months. The way the law says is 4 hours of supervision per 160 hours of practice. If you're part-time, it's prorated. So if you only work 20 hours a week, you would only need 2 hours of supervision per month, but it would take you 4 years rather than 2 years to reach 4,000 hours of practice, twice as long.
Who needs to do this? Does it have to be a MSW? Does it have to be a social worker?
Yep, we'll talk about that next. So that's kind of the amounts that you're going to need. The licensing supervisor might be your employment supervisor who's a social worker. It might be someone off-site if there's no one in your agency who is a licensed social worker who could do the supervision. And they provide direction and evaluation of your practice. They must have completed 30 hours of training in supervision, and this is a new requirement. This went into effect August 1st of 2011, and some supervisors don't realize that they have already completed the 30 hours of training. Some think it's a new requirement, new training, and they may have taken a class as a part of their MSW program at St. Kate's, where they took a 2-credit semester class in supervision as a part of their degree, and 1 semester credit equals 15 hours, so they have the 30 hours done and they did it 20 years ago, but they're not even like thinking of that. Others have gone to workshops. So, you know, make sure that if a supervisor says, oh, I can't be your supervisor because I haven't done the 30 hours of training in supervision, that you know that there's no time frame in law as to when that training needed to occur, and maybe there is something in their background that would meet the requirement already. 15 of the 30 hours can also be independent study, independent reading in the area of supervision. And an LSW may be supervised by another LSW who is done with their own supervised practice requirement, or by a licensed graduate social worker, LGSW, by an LISW or LICSW. Content of supervision according to our law should include development of professional values. It's really for your professional development. So it's a little different from employment supervision. So, you know, the supervisor should be saying to you, what areas are you weak in? How can I help you develop as a social worker? How can I help you grow? Might be talking about your practice skills, your authorized scope of practice, ensuring competent practice, ethical standards, ethical dilemmas that you run into. Types of supervision, how does that supervision look? Half of it, 50 hours of the 100 must be one-on-one supervision. And then half of that must be one-on-one in-person supervision. So 25 hours, a minimum, has to be one-on-one in-person supervision of the 100. You could have all 100 be one-on-one in-person, that would be fine too. If you only have 25 one-on-one in-person supervision, then the other 25 one-on-one supervision hours could be electronic media supervision while maintaining visual contact, is the way it's defined in law. The remaining 50% or the remaining 50 hours can be one-on-one telephone or group supervision. And group supervision is limited to 6 supervisees. That doesn't include the supervisor. And it may include in-person, telephone, or once again, eye-to-eye electronic media while maintaining visual contact. So we frequently see people submit supervision plans, and I'm going to mention what that is in a second, that say 4 hours of one-on-one individual in-person supervision per month. That's fine. Another plan might say 2 hours of one-on-one in-person supervision per month and 2 hours of group supervision per month. That's fine, half and half. Might be some telephone supervision mixed in. Maybe, you know, 1 hour of one-on-one in-person supervision per month, 1 hour of electronic one-on-one eye-to-eye while maintaining visual contact supervision per month, and 2 hours of telephone supervision per month. So you have a host of ways you can choose to get your supervision and be compliant with the law. Mm-hmm.
I've heard that some of those supervisors do charge that there is a fee for that, depending on the supervisor. Is that what a lot of them do, or is that rare?
I think one important thing to know when you go in for a job interview is to say, would there be anyone in the agency that could supervise me? I'm going to need supervision for my first 2 years of full-time practice. If they say, no, we don't have anyone on site, then you might say, do you partner with another agency where there might be someone who could supervise me, or would you be willing to, it's a negotiating, would you be willing to pay for outside supervision? So I think that's the first place you would start. And then if that isn't available, then you may have to look off-site and you may have to pay. And there are some supervisors who, you know, kind of will do kind of a free, matter of fact, we've even talked about the concept of pay it forward, supervise one person for free and maybe that person will carry it forward, you know. But supervisors often charge if it's off-site. And also, if you use the eye-to-eye electronic media format of supervision, the main thing to remember is it must be secure. And no email supervision. So a little bit about the plan, about documentation related to your supervision. There's two pieces of documentation that come into us. One is called your supervision plan form. And on our website, on the home page, you'll see the plan and the verification form. And you choose the non-clinical one. You'll see a non-clinical and a clinical plan, and a non-clinical and a clinical supervision verification form. So you would choose the non-clinical supervision plan form. It needs to come into the board within 60 days of beginning a position, once you are licensed. Also, you need to submit a revised plan within 60 days if there's any change. And you'll circle on the plan, new or revised. So if you change positions, if you change supervisors, if you go from part-time to full-time practice, if you were getting all one-on-one in-person supervision and now you're adding on group supervision, any change like that, a new plan comes in. If a current plan isn't on file at the time you come up for renewal, you'll be assessed a $40 supervision plan late fee. The reason that's here is because we want everyone to submit plans. For your benefit, we want you to know and get a letter from us that says your plan's approved. We don't see any problems. Or a letter that says, whoops, this supervisor's license expired 2 months ago. You can't use this person. You know, we don't want that to happen a year later or 2 years later after you've been paying out of pocket for supervision and you find out that that supervision won't count. So the plans are really to protect you. And on that plan, the supervisor must attest that they've completed their 30 hours of training and supervision. So make sure they've checked that box. And then at the time of your license renewal, you will be asked to submit a supervision verification form. And that is, all supervisors who have submitted a plan must do a verification form attesting to the hours of supervision that they completed during that renewal period. That's when you get credit for those hours. So your plan is your proposal, and the verification form is, yes, I've done some hours, I get credit for them. We only ask for that at the time of renewal.
These forms are on the website.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
This 60 days of putting in the plan, does that start, say if you have to do the temporary license, does that start when you get back? Or
Yes. Yep, because you need to be working under a plan if you hold a temporary license. And, you know, you may not want to lose the 60 days too. You know, then you've been working without supervision, and it will take you 2 years plus 2 months to finish up your requirement. You know, so the sooner you have your plan going and you start that supervision, the more quickly you can be done with it. Okay, continuing education, just a little more about how to get those hours. It's required at renewal, 40, 2 in ethics, and 6 in supervision if you happen to be a licensing supervisor in the future. Pre-approval of continuing education isn't required by the board. However, we do pre-approve some CE providers. We don't approve programs. And so on our website, we'll have a list of approved CE providers. They're approved for a year. If they're on that list, it's automatically going to be fine. We also will automatically accept ASWB and NASW's approved providers or programs. One approves providers, one approves programs. And so on brochures, when you go to a conference, it might say ASWB approved provider. Then know that Minnesota Board of Social Work takes that. Now, if you don't see that at all, that's okay too. As long as it meets our requirements, it doesn't have to be pre-approved. And so, you need to know what our CE requirements are. They are that a program is for the benefit of licensed social workers, social work professionals, that it's an ethical program, that it's being offered by a qualified presenter, that it's not just maybe a community forum for parents, for example, that it's really more a targeted professional program. There's some things excluded from CE. I think it's things like procedural issues is one exclusion. Another is business practices. Say you take a course in computer. No, doesn't work. Say you take a course in Spanish, even though you're working with Spanish clients, no, that wouldn't work. Say you work in a hospital, you take a class in CPR, doesn't work. But if you take a class in vulnerable adult reporting, maltreatment of minors, that would work. You know, so once again, it has to kind of fit the niche of social work. The other exclusion is it can't be for your own self-development. So for example, if you take a class in stress reduction, you know, wouldn't work. But if you take a class in learning stress reduction techniques to use with clients, it would work. Okay, ways people get CE, academic coursework. And this is something after your license is issued. This is something like if any of you plan to go on and get your master's degrees in social work, and you are in LSW working at the same time, any of that coursework, a 2-credit semester class, will give you 30 CE hours. So 3-credit semester class will give you 45 CE hours and almost meet the requirement right there. What you might be missing is 2 in ethics. But you know, many times LSWs who are get their, if they're in a master's program, they have many, many CEs. Educational workshops, conferences, in-services, staff trainings, those are all ways people get CE. Independent study, you can be doing independent reading on a topic. Journal article, up to 15 hours, remember, of 40. If you do that, what you need to keep, because you're not going to have a certificate of attendance or proof to show us if you would be audited, so you would need to keep a record of what you read, a little summary, the date and time, number of hours, title of the book, you know, almost like a little mini book report type of thing, how what you read applies to your practice, and you would submit that instead. You need to keep information like that for 1 year beyond your renewal. And when you renew, you'll just have to say, they'll say, did you complete 40 hours of continuing education? Check. Did you do 2 in ethics? Check. And then we audit a percentage. And if you happen to be randomly audited, then we'll send you a letter that will say, please submit certificates of attendance or documentation to support what you attested to on the renewal. I think we said all that. Okay, the last piece of this, there are 2 arms at the board. One is the licensing arm, and that's kind of what we've been talking about. The law is kind of divided in half that way too, in a sense. There's information about the board and licensing, and then the last half of the Practice Act talks about professional and ethical standards of practice, and really comes under our compliance arm at the board. So that's what this next section is kind of all about. And the board, through the years, you'll see we do presentations at MSSA, at some conferences. Many times we do some things on ethics, and you might want to go to a bigger ethics presentation. You'll need hours of ethics to meet your CE requirement, and that will be mandated. So these are the kinds of things that come in to play when we think of standards of practice. How you represent yourself to your clients. Are you honestly representing who you are and what you're doing? Do they know what your degree background is? Do you display your wall certificate? How do you sign your notes? Those kinds of things. Competence and impairment. Are you competent to do the work that you're doing? So say, for example, you're in a setting and somebody comes to see you and, oh, it's a young girl who has an eating disorder. And you start to think, oh my goodness, I don't really have the skills or training to help her get the help she needs. Then you must realize your limitations, refer her to someone else who would be competent. So it's knowing your strengths, but also knowing your areas of limitation. And if you need consultation or supervision, even after you're done with your supervision requirement, that you might seek additional consultation regarding a client. And you might want to document that in the chart. to cover you. You know, if it isn't in the record, it didn't happen. I worked in a hospital for many years and consulted with hospital attorney about this case, consulted with risk management. This is what they advise. You know, those types of things. Consulting is a good thing to do. Oh, impairment I also wanted to mention too. If someone is impaired by reason of a physical illness, a mental illness, or a substance abuse, chemical dependency problem, then they must either self-report to the board or to what we call HPSP. It stands for the Health Professional Services Program. It's a diversion program. If you know a colleague who falls into those categories of impairment, you either need to report them to the board or to HPSP. HPSP is an alternative to a report to the board. It's a program that all of the health licensing boards belong to. Some of the dollars that we get from your license fee go to support that program, and it is a way that someone can be assessed, get help, be monitored, and if they follow through with the program, a formal complaint and report never goes to the Board of Social Work. So it's a way to get help in a confidential way where it never becomes public information. Now, if they do not get help, if they drop out of a program, then HPSP would make a formal report to the board. It's called Health Professional Services Program. And so doctors are in that program, dentists, social workers, psychologists. The next section talks about responsibilities to clients, things about clients' rights for self-determination. If they're in a research study, what you must inform them of in advance, non-discrimination, things like that. Relationships with clients, former clients, and individuals. This talks about boundaries, dual relationships, mixing, personal relationships, professional relationships, business relationships, professional relationships, sexual relationships, professional relationships. No. That is a huge area where folks get into trouble. Treatment and intervention services. General information about what must minimally be in a treatment plan. You know, that you need to update your treatment plan routinely, and it's not going to be specifics because there's so many practice settings and so many specific laws that might relate to the work that you're doing, but it's going to have general information. Confidentiality in records. When you are mandated to report, duty to warn, those sorts of things. Fees and billing practices. Clients must be made aware in advance what the fees are going to be, not have any surprises. It talks about fraudulent billing, those kinds of things. And then reporting requirements. We've talked about reporting unlicensed practice. You're obligated to report a colleague who is not licensed and should be. You're obligated to report a colleague that comes into work impaired. You're obligated to, you know, report a minor, etc. So those who is vulnerable to maltreatment. And how the process works, the compliance arm of the board investigates and resolves complaints against applicants. So there might even be something on your application that warrants going to compliance. And what I mentioned was unlicensed practice. If you say, I've been working, weren't licensed, an applicant may end up in this category real quickly. Or licensees. Complaints come from all over, from clients, other licensees, other health professionals, employers, supervisors, government agencies. And social workers may be subject to the compliance process and to disciplinary or corrective action. You may have to come in for an educational meeting with the board, a face-to-face meeting, when they ask you, you know, how did this happen? And here are some of the, you know, how David Letterman, I don't know if you watch him or not. I saw him, I think he's been celebrating his 30th year or something. Anyway, this last week, basically sort of the top 5 or 6 or 7 kind of categories of complaints that come to us. The first would be boundary issues with clients. And it's important to know who the client is. I remember a case, it was a nursing home social worker. And she had been working with an elderly client and had met with the whole family, worked with the whole family. The grandson of the grandma who was her patient asked her out to coffee. And she didn't realize that he also was her client. The family is the client. So know who your client is. Confidentiality related to record keeping. You know, if someone comes into your office and your record is open on your desk. I remember a case, I think it was a school social worker, and a woman walked into the office and saw somebody's case file, and she thought, oh, I know that person, they're my neighbor. And mentioned to her neighbor, oh, I understand your son is seeing the social worker at the school. And she said, how did you know that? She said, oh, I saw the information on the social worker's desk. So you're responsible for keeping things confidential, whether it's in your computer, you have your computer open, information on an iPad open, chart notes, whether it's you're in an elevator. The doctor, in a hospital setting says to you, so how's Mrs. Jones doing? You're the one that needs to say, maybe we can step off on this floor and talk about her for a minute. Somebody else is on that elevator with you maybe. Or you go into a house to make a visit, home visit, and the neighbor says, oh, who are you? You're coming to see Alice. How's she doing? I know she's been sick. So all sorts of opportunities that you'll run into, and it's important to think in advance what you're going to do, how you're going to kind of get out of that ethical dilemma before it happens, before it gets bigger. Faxing things, having backup checks about where you're faxing something. I remember some mental health and chemical dependency records went somewhere where they weren't supposed to go. We got a complaint. Okay, so records, length of time for record retention. In our law, it says you must keep a record for 7 years after last day of service, or as otherwise specified in law. Release of information, when can you release records and to whom? Those kinds of things are in our client record section. Use of titles, what's on your business card. Advertising. Impairment, we talked about that a little bit, your competence. There doesn't need to be harm to the client. It could just be a risk of harm to the client related to your competence. And termination of client services. This is another area where, for whatever reason, I think LSW is getting trouble in this area more than some of the master's folks. And it's giving the client your phone number, letting them, after you've discharged them, or I'll stop by and see you next week, even though you're no longer working with them anymore, or not giving them enough notice so you work through the termination issues, just kind of cutting off too quickly, not giving them choice of referrals if you're referring them to someone else in time to make that referral. So termination and post-termination contact are some other areas that people get into trouble. And unlicensed practice, and we talked about that. So those are some of the big ones. If you just, one thing about this next area, and then we're almost done here, if you're going to go on and apply for get a master's degree in social work, eventually want to become a clinical social worker, there are some new academic requirements that became law as of August 1st, 2011. And so now if somebody applies for the clinical license, you not only need a master's degree in social work, you need 360 hours of clinical course content in 6 clinical knowledge areas that are specific. And these are the 6 areas. You need 108 clock hours in diagnosis and 36 in assessment-based treatment planning and et cetera, et cetera. You can see what they are. And your schools will probably talk to you about this. The schools in Minnesota have developed grids about how courses you might choose as a part of an MSW program could fit into this requirement and meet this requirement. And some folks are able to meet most of their hours through their MSW program, and others have to do a little extra coursework or a little extra continuing education to make something up in order to meet the requirement if they want to, in the future, become an LICSW. So it's just something for you guys to be aware of if you are going on to get your master's, to know that that's out there, to have a conversation with the school officials and counselors about, you know, what's this about the 360 clinical clock hours? I think I'd want to do clinical work down the road, and what kind of choices should I be making when I choose my courses? And how these hours can be obtained is either through your MSW graduate degree program, additional graduate coursework from an accredited institution of higher learning. You could take like a class in diagnosis from the Department of Psychology at the U of M to add on if you needed something more, for example, or up to 90 hours can be CE, not to exceed 20 of independent study. However, CE for this purpose is more rigorous because it's fulfilling an academic requirement. And so a requirement is not just that you have a certificate of attendance as we require for ongoing CE to renew a license, but it also must include a course description, and the big one is a post-test. Not all CE programs include a post-test. So just something to be aware of.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
This is what I've heard. If you're going on to get your master's, you don't need to take that licensure course.
Unless you plan to work. Do you plan to work part-time while you're in graduate school, for example, in a social service position? Then you may need to become licensed if you are working in an agency that's not exempt.
Even though because you wouldn't fall under the status or the student umbrella?
The student only applies to someone when they're in their internship, and it's that internship that you're placed in which may be different from the position where you are working.
It only works for your internship, but not other.
Correct. So it's very specific. Uh-huh.
I think the reason you've heard that is because the St. Kate St. Thomas program is that you can do the one-year option. So many people will just plow through, do that full year and not work, and then go through everything. Because if you're doing a one-year plan, like, it is a full year and you don't usually have time to work. So I think that's where that.
Yeah, and if you're not going to work for whatever reason, because you're in graduate school, because, you know, you don't want to take a year off because you've been working so hard, I don't know, don't want to work in the social work field yet, take a job in a different field, you know, you might not need to be licensed. You're right.
I'm trying to, because I think someone is doing this and I think didn't know that they should not be working and she's going to go to get her master's next year and she's got that, but it's not social work. I mean, it wasn't.
Well, we.
Other, right, so I'm going to be telling her, guess what I found out.
Uh-huh. Good. Okay. Uh-huh.
Give an example of an exempt, we keep referring to, unless it's an exempted agency.
County. Hennepin County, Ramsey County.
Okay.
State agency, Department of Human Services. Okay, and so our kind of mantra is students should be talking with their MSW program officials, utilizing the grid that their schools have developed to determine how their courses will fit into the 360 clock hours required in the 6 specific clinical knowledge areas if they're looking towards eventually LICSW license eligibility. And then here's my last slide. It's the pass rates for 2010. The category that you want to look at is the bachelor's. This is first-time test takers. 86% of you in this room, or more, might vary from school to school, I don't know, will pass the test your first time. Minnesota does a good job of educating and preparing students. Nationwide, the first-time pass rate for bachelor's is 78%, so we do better than other states. And I know the new exams were last year for the first time, and I was very interested to see what the 2011 pass rates were going to look like based on the exams having been changed somewhat. We had to gather some data for the Sunset Report that we recently did, and so we had contacted ASWB and said, do you have the 2011 stats yet? They hadn't broken them out apart yet, but it looked like we did very well and continued to do very well. So we got some rough information, but they haven't yet published the this information that they always send us, usually a month or two from now, for the year before. So any last questions? If you have questions, call the board. You know, send us an email. We're happy to answer questions. And here is kind of our website, ASWB's website, email address on the last slide. Well, thank you very much. And they have a break.
Yeah, why don't you take a break? Why don't you do a 5-minute break, thereabouts, 5 to 10? And then I'll talk about the exam itself.
You know, I might still be on here, so why don't I try to get off?
It's high tech.
Well, I'm not sure how to get me off and you on.
Okay, all right. Hello. Take hers off. I suppose we gotta
Exit out of it.
exit out. Where's the, is there, where's the, oh, there it is. Let's see, I do escape first, I think. Do that. And then log off.
Would it be in here? What's
Oh, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, click on that.
click on that. Yeah,
There it is.
that one there.
Eject.
Eject.
And then we'll put yours in.
Okay. And what's that say?
And we can now remove it.
Oh, yeah, safe to remove.
You ready to put yours in?
Okay, and should we log her off? Or-
No, this
Oh, she's not
this
even
is
on.
just a generic, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Is it a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Sorry, you can actually go like this.
Oh. Miracles. Okay. Let's see. BSW. All right. And then slideshow from.
Oh, no.
How can I do the from first?
Do this. Click on that little icon. There you go.
Okay. Good. Yep. Okay. All right. This is actually George's stuff. We switched.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you have to.
So I gotta be George now.
Yeah.
30 or an hour.
Yeah, you're a little bit taller now, George.
I am. Love it. How'd it go this morning?
It was good. We had a lot of people show up, so
Oh, really?
kind of scrambling around with the handouts.
Okay.
It was full house.
Was it? Good.
And I think you're supposed to be done at 4:30.
Yeah.
So I'll be back at 4:30 to
Okay.
shut down.
Wrap her up?
Yep.
Okay.
And write the DVD. So it's still recording.
What's that?
It's still recording.
Oh, okay.
So,
All right.
I'm back.
I've known him for so we got to know each other from nursing market.
Yeah, Frank was the second.
Yeah. Because, yeah, he switched
And he was at ASU, he worked at ASU, which is sort of the administrative services unit. Ooh, Oklahoma.
You're
keep in touch with him?
Not so much,
They do, 'cause
somewhat.
I haven't seen him for
I
probably
really,
a year.
you know,
Yeah.
his other, well, but, you know, so that creates some
Right.
issues, but, you know, and now that they're, because he has a teacher.
Right.
You're in Austin, that's progressive.
Right,
The rest of
right.
the state, not so much, so I was like, you're moving where?
Yeah.
So it was really,
That's
you
right.
know.
I haven't seen him. since
So,
he's-
should I say hi to you? To
Tell
Frank?
him I did a presentation, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell
We
him,
have another mutual friend who's on the board at,
tell him there's no more honeymoon at the board.
No more honeymoon at the board. Okay, I'll write that to him. Thank
Meaning
you.
we're busy all the time. We used to have occasionally, like we used to tease Frank saying, you know, you haven't had any hard stuff. You're like in a honeymoon period of starting a job, you know, and they give
Yeah,
you
he
a
should have
little-
been here for the sunset thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hi. Don't need you to like So what you do is you apply, you take the test, you have to apply, you take the test, and then it's held open for a year. And, you know, we'll send you the thing, you owe us X number of dollars to become licensed, just ignore it. You know, come fall, maybe you think, oh, I want to do social work, I'm tired of nanny. Right. You know, then send in your fees, become licensed, or it might close out after that year, you know, and then if you decided you're too slower, apply again. BSW, you pay a $45 fee, you don't need to take the test. You'll go through the process really quickly because you don't need to take the test, and you don't need supervision or anything yet. So, yeah, that's what I would do.
I'm applying, I haven't quite accepted yet to Teach for America.
Okay.
And I mean, it's Teach for America, yeah. Social work in a way, in terms of or if I go into it and do like special occupation before that can be considered social work.
If you kind of need to justify how you're doing social work, I knew it might be okay. When you send that plan to the board, yes, it has a position description. And, or the addendum, sometimes the position description is very generic. And you might write, you know, these are the types of social work tasks I'm doing, I think it's social. Or you might say, not doing any social work, you know, even if you are licensed, you don't need supervision, I don't think you need supervision. You don't need supervision if you're doing social work. So you might need a license, that's another thing you could do. But you don't need supervision because you're not practicing. So then you would make the case that I'm really teaching you how to do social work.
Okay.
And we would either agree or disagree with you, ask for more information, they compare how positions would be entitled. So, some of those, some jobs, you know, are questionable. Kind of go into
Just kicking the door on the way in, I guess.
Sheryl? I don't know her the last name. Yep.
So you would need to know what the clientele is of that agency. Which I don't know. And to be specific, for example, like there's like agents, there are some specific programs that are specific. Yeah. And I know how. Okay. India. But I don't know. The adult has to direct relations. So you said you're Well, then, you're not done with your. Right, so no, right, right, I just can't take the place. Right, we can still. Right, but this one's not there. Okay. Can I get my
Sure.
stuff out of your way? Thank
This is
you.
yours.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, I think that is all I have. Oh, this isn't mine.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Why don't we get started? We have till 4:30 today, and my name's Mike Shavanik. I teach in the graduate program. I teach methods and psychopathology, and I think one of the reasons they asked me to do this was I'm also chair of it's called a Licensing Exam Review Course, LERC. It's made up of faculty from this school and from a variety of other schools and some people in private practice that provide preparation for the test. And so we offer, I think every quarter, we offer there's a BSW training that's offered like I say, every 4 months. So I've been doing this training piece probably since about 97, 98. I actually had to take the exam myself for the LICSW back in 97. So I think the main piece is that I'm going to go over some strategies here in terms of thinking about the test, and then we'll do some practice questions. Yes?
Do you have a copy of this PowerPoint?
I don't. I don't. So you can sort of just take notes, and then we'll practice some of these questions. You know, there are in either, I believe in each of the libraries, St. Kate's and St. Thomas, there's ASWB, there's a practice manual that you can have access to. So, and that's where a lot of these questions come from. So I'd suggest if you want to get some practice, that'd be a good place to go for that. So, you have the test. Remember the first step is in terms of getting the social work board approval. Sheryl talked about that in terms of the steps that are involved there. Again, the course itself is it's all multiple, what I like to call multiple guess, that you will have usually four choices, and many times if you can toss out one or two of the possibilities, you have a good chance of getting it correct, even if you don't know what the answer is. So, some test day tips in terms of some real basic common sense sorts of things. You want to arrive early. The biggest thing that gets in the way of the test taking is anxiety, right? And so if you can sort of kind of like what your grandmother told you about, you know, eating, making sure you have a good breakfast, make sure you get enough sleep, arrive early, know where you're going in terms of where the test exam is. You'll need a picture ID, so that's another piece that you want to make sure you have. And again, you get 4 hours, I think, for the test itself.
I'm sorry, the
Yes.
authorization letter, it says you will not be allowed to test without it. Is that something we'll receive in the mail, or will we print
Yes.
it offline?
I believe that's something you'll get in the mail, I think. But you want to make sure you have that. Okay? So we'll just keep moving along here. And here they identified the various locations. And again, they have a set number of places available, or seats available. So that's why I think Sheryl had talked about that sometimes some fill up quicker than others. But those are the test sites. Must have 2 forms of ID. So I think that's sort of self-explanatory. Go on. So again, this is a national exam, so not a state exam. It's assessing minimum level of competence. There's 170 questions, like what Sheryl had talked about. Remember, there's 20 questions that are being tested out. So what that means is you don't want to fight with any question. You don't want to spend a lot of time with any one particular question. What tends to happen is you'll start thinking about this question and you'll be using too much energy on one particular question. What I suggest is you try to get into a rhythm in terms of answering it. You want to sort of read the question and read it carefully, and then make your best choice. And then if you're not sure, there is a way you can actually check these questions to go back to them later. So I really recommend that you sort of get methodical in terms of answering the questions. Take your best guess, even if you don't know. You want to make sure you answer all the questions, because percentage-wise, even if for those questions you don't know, you have a chance of getting them correct. So, and again, the tests are scored 75% pass rate, and you'll find out right away. All the questions are job related. This exam itself actually started out, they did a job analysis across the country to look at what are the tasks that social workers do. And so there's going to be 3 different levels or different types of questions you're going to get. The first are recall questions. And by recall, it would be a concept, and you'll just have to name what it is. For example, what would be a recall question might be, well, I guess I'm...
What theory is it when something changes and the effect doesn't change? Would that be?
Yes. Yep. Or in like, maybe there might be, I'm thinking, again, I'm more familiar with the LICSW exam. So if there was a psychoanalytic model, might they ask a particular they'll want you to define a defense, one of the defenses. But it's basically taking a concept and that you have to know the definition of. The other level is application. It's an application sort of question. So they'll say they'll want you to apply a certain concept in a situation. So an application question might be if there's for example, applying the ecological model, the social work model, how that might look in practice. And the third level are reasoning questions, and that would be where they have a case, and they'll say, in this case, they'll lay out a case study, and they'll say, what would you do first in this particular case? Now, the good news, in terms of the LSW exam, you're going to have primarily mostly recall or more. You're going to have more recall questions in this exam than you would some of the others. And as you get to the higher level exams, they're going to have more reasoning kinds of questions, more case studies. So again, the recall is you're going to see primarily more of those. Okay? And here's a listing. You can actually, I think you can go to the ASWB website, and they'll also give you sort of this outline of what's on the exam. And I really recommend before you start studying to look at this you want to study SMART. So you want to look at, well, how many questions am I going to have in each of these various areas? So 27% for human development, diversity, behavior in the environment. And then assessment is going to be 28%. direct and indirect practice. You know, direct practice is working directly with the client. Indirect is talking maybe to collateral resources or to other people about the client. That's indirect practice. And then the professional relationship values and ethics is 19%. Particularly around the ethics piece, if you can get a copy of the NASW Code of Ethics, that brochure pamphlet is probably a good piece, good resource to study. How the test questions are structured. Again, they're developed. Many times faculty will write questions. You can actually get paid, I think, something like $1,000 for a collection of some questions. But again, as you see some of these tests or these questions, you don't want to fight with the questions. If you're angry about the questions, save it for after you pass the test, and then you can sign up and make better questions. But in terms of the way they're structured, again, all these questions are coming from what's called knowledge statements, and you can actually go to that ASWB website, and they will have an outline with a list of the different knowledge statements, and that will give you, again, some clues in terms of what kind of things they're going to be looking for and what they're going to be testing you on. Each question is going to have 4 possible answers, the right answer, and plus 3 distractors. And some of those distractors you may be able to toss out. And you'll see in a minute when we get to some questions, so we can get you some practice. You'll see what I mean about that. Common types of distractors. Answer is true but irrelevant to the question. Answer is too narrow or too broad for the question. Answer is a common misperception. Answer is carefully worded, sounds plausible but is wrong. So again, the other piece is many times you may have a right question and another one that is almost right. You know, you'll get 2 that you're going to be going back and forth on. And that's just the way they have it set up. So, in terms of approaching the question, probably the biggest roadblock that people run into is not taking enough time to read the question. Just the real, and you want to look at key words. What are the key words in the questions? And we'll give you some practice doing that in just a minute. But in terms of key words, like most likely, least likely to do, first thing to do, those sorts of things. Okay? Decide which general topic area the question addresses. So you might want to do that even before you see the possible answers. Before reading any of the answers, hypothesize the answer. So, and we'll again give you some practice doing that. Because sometimes what happens is we start getting sort of caught up with what the possible answers are. So if you can take some guesses first, that can speed up your ability to answer the questions. Of course, make sure you answer every question because, again, many times, percentage-wise, you can still get answers right even if you don't know what the answer is. And if you feel stuck with a question, make sure you do your best guess, take a guess at it, and move on to the next one. Okay? Choose the most comprehensive answer that meets the specifics of the question. And when in doubt, favor the client over the agency, favor health over disease. Preserves the answer that preserves life. Choose the answer that begins where the client is. You've probably heard that probably 100 times in your courses, right? Choose the most expectable answer. Choose the answer that best meets the limits of confidentiality. Don't choose an answer that supports stereotypes. Don't choose do-nothing answers. Exception is middle or later stages of group treatment. One of the things you'll find in terms of the area of group treatment, what they are really talking about there is social group work, which is a form of group work where you use the group process. You get group members to talk amongst themselves And so that's why that middle stage of group, you would, if it's set up correctly, you'll be able to sit back a bit and let the group process sort of unfold. On team collaboration, questions don't exceed the limits of the social work role in terms of what, and again, in terms of a generic thinking about not a social worker in Minnesota, but a social worker generically across the country. When in doubt, choose assessment over treatment. That's a common theme that you'll see with a lot of these different questions, that you really want to assess and be very intentional about what sort of treatment you provide or what kind of intervention you provide. Assessment questions rule out medical conditions first. That's always a sort of a common good idea in terms of practice. And the last one, particularly for those of you that may have some a lot of practice experience or a number of years of practice experience, the tendency to read more into the question is probably, that's where those have more practice, that's where you get into trouble. Because this question or test is really geared towards, it's sort of an academic test. So that you don't want to read more into the question than what's actually there. Okay?
So what do you mean by medical conditions first?
That's a good question. What I mean by that is that you want to assess, is there any medical causes for what you're seeing in what the client is presenting. So if they're...
Right, so somehow that would be worded into the question?
Right, well, they might ask, what would you do first with this?
Okay.
And they may, one of the options,
Do a scenario and then, okay.
they might say, and then one of the options might be, well, you want to rule out medical conditions first. Yeah. And these are some of the resources. Again, the state board, ASWB, again, that's a good place to find. They have an outline. They'll have the content outline that you see that we looked at here briefly. So you can look at percentages in terms of numbers of questions in each of the areas. Also, they'll have those knowledge statements that can maybe give you a guide as terms of what you want to be studying. And the Social Work Dictionary is another really great way of learning this material. I mean, the good news is you're in a program now, so you have an advantage over people that are out in the practice area that haven't been in school for a while, because you have knowledge of these concepts. You know, this exam is really like learning a language. It's the social work language. And so you're familiar with these concepts. But the Barker Dictionary is a nice way of kind of reviewing key concepts in social work without trying to hunt it, where did I read, in which textbook did I read this concept? You could take a lot of time trying to hunt these various, where these various concepts are, and that's where the Barker Dictionary, Social Work Dictionary probably is going to be a helpful resource for you. And you can actually, I think it's in the reference section in either of the libraries. Gesundheit. Yeah. Do you think? Oh, okay. Okay, and so that's I think that's the one I'd recommend in terms of the resources that are probably going to be most useful for you. Okay, some of the exam questions. Let's see what we get here. See how you do. Okay. A social worker has learned that a father becomes quite angry when his 2-year-old son soils and wets his pants. The father's usual response to this behavior is to severely spank the child. The father's behavior most likely reflects, okay, first, what type of question is this? Assessment, it might be assessment, okay. Anything else that it might have something to do with development, right? Father, son. But it also might be something about assessment, right? So let's see what the options are. a need to explore his relationship with the child, a distorted perception of developmental milestones, C, a need for developing new ways to cope with stress, or D, displacement of his anger towards his wife. The father's behavior most likely reflects. What do you think? B. Okay, do I hear a lot of B's? Yeah? Yay! See? Good job. All right. Okay? Any questions about that one? Okay? Again, they're going to give you some distractors, right? And then it's trying to find the right answer. So let's get some more. Basically, I think the more you can practice these kinds of questions, we'll have a collection here, and then if you go to each of the libraries and look at the practice exam, the manual piece, that doing lots of practice will build confidence. It also will let you know where you're weak. What areas or what topic areas are you weak at. Okay, so the next one here. The major task of adolescence is to resolve the conflict between. Any guesses before we?
Erickson, like the intimacy versus isolation stuff.
Yeah, it might be, right? Right? Yeah, we're talking about developmental stages, aren't we? Possibly. Okay, let's see what we got. Trust versus mistrust. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Independence versus dependence. Or D, initiative versus guilt. Okay, I hear some D's, some C's. No, the major task of adolescence is to resolve the conflict. Okay? Adolescence. Okay? So how many C's do we have? Well, now you got to take a guess, right? Right? Okay. Why do you think it's C?
Because it's the autonomy and shame and doubt. I'm just thinking that was the. What is that even? But that is adolescence. Adolescence are young adults. I thought all of the other ones were like little kids. The initiative versus.
Okay. Should we see what it is? Here it is. Drum roll. Okay. Now, why did you choose, those that chose C, why did you choose C? Why did?
That's what they're grappling with. They're trying to be adults and they're trying to be, they're grappling, I know, I am right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Let's go to the next one. Effective parental discipline for a 6-year-old child includes all of the following actions except. Okay, so what are the key words here? Except. Very good. A, stopping or interrupting an unacceptable behavior. Suggesting appropriate alternatives to the behavior. Indicating the parent's disapproval of the behavior. Or C, postponing a response until the child can understand the consequences of the behavior. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, you have to wait a long time, right? Okay. Adversive conditioning might be the therapy of choice in all but which of the following? Now, we have to figure out what aversive conditioning is. Right? That's the key word.
Isn't it like, every time your kid would screw up on something, you would, take away a privilege or something? Would that be kind of right? Like, you can't watch TV because you do
No, it's a,
Wouldn't it be like doing like the opposite? It's class, it's similar to class.
Is it like a reinforcement?
I think it's a behavioral.
Okay.
A behavioral modification.
okay. Well, let's see what the options are once. Sexual perversion, simple phobia, school phobia, or addiction. So adversive conditioning, so it'd be like a punishment. Okay. Or another example would be alcoholics that take, what's the chemical, antabuse. There's an antabuse, and so they take antabuse, and if they drink that and they mix that with alcohol, they get very sick. That's adversive conditioning.
Exposing a little, you know,
So it's a negative
it's a negative.
negative punishment. So which of these might be the therapy of choice, all but which of the following? So which one?
You probably use an addiction, so that one's out. That one's not the answer.
Okay. Okay. So then we got 3 left. Sexual perversion, simple phobia, and school phobia.
It's gotta be simple or school.
Okay.
Should punish.
Okay. So you're saying between B and C?
Yeah,
I think it's C.
Okay.
Because you don't want to punish a child.
Okay. How many people think it's C? Okay. Yeah. And why is it C?
You don't want to punish kids for
Right.
having negative attached to something that they need to be avoided.
Exactly. So you don't, so this negative punishment is used with these other, but you don't want to use it with kids because they have to go to school. You don't want to create a painful experience for kids going to school. Does that make sense? Okay. Now the good news about this is when you do these and you get them wrong, you remember them, right? So this is a way of learning the content for the exam. It's sort of an indirect way of learning the content. Yeah.
When you get your results, they go back over what you got wrong.
That's a good question. You know, I don't, I know they give you your score.
What about the one you paid for, the practice one?
Oh, the practice one, you can go back and, yeah, the practice one, you should be able to go back and see which ones you've missed. That's really the whole purpose of the practice thing, because that way then you'll be able to identify sort of those that you got wrong. Okay? So we'll do a few more here. According to behavior theory, a structured plan designed to change a voluntary behavior is called, now this is what would you call this? Would this be a recall question or a recall question, right? So you got to know what behavior theory is, right? A structured plan designed to change a voluntary behavior is called, any guesses before we, what do you think?
I don't know, it's, our other example would be like a DBT type of
Okay. Voluntary behavior. Okay. Well, why don't we see what we have? Is it operant conditioning? Is it biofeedback? No? So you could toss this one out, right? So,
because none of us have heard of that. So we're all like, no.
so we might just have 3 to go with. Classical, what about classical conditioning? Or D, reinforcement. A structured plan designed to change a voluntary behavior is called, what do you think? So what? So we can toss out, do we still toss out biofeedback? Toss that one out, so we got 3 left. 2 are 2 types of conditioning, and 1 is reinforcement, but it's not a,
The volunteer behavior is what I'm getting stuck on, because like, well, like Pavlov's dogs, they weren't really controlling their behavior. They
Right.
just happened.
right.
Because if it's voluntary,
It'd be voluntary behaviors. So how many people say A, operant conditioning? No? How about C, classical conditioning? Okay, a few classical conditioning. What about D, reinforcement? Okay, let's see what it is. It's actually operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is, I think, of operating on the environment, is a maybe a way of thinking about it. Operant conditioning is what happens in schools. Anybody have kids that get stickers? Right? That's operant conditioning. And reinforcement is an intervention used in operant conditioning. Okay, so that's an example. Remember, they're talking about some responses are going to be too narrow, right? Then what the correct answer is. Okay, and so in your comment about that Pavlov's dog, that's an example of classical conditioning, and which is involuntary behaviors, right? Because the dog was salivating, and
Reinforcement is used in operation.
correct. Yes. Yes, exactly. All right? All right, should we see what you're learning? Whether you want to or not, right? Okay, recognizing that the families you work with are social systems, you would expect that all of the following are true except. Okay, now what's some of the key words here? Except, yeah, and what else? So what did I see here? Social systems, right? Social systems. So what about social systems? A, change in one member will affect the other members. Change in the system as a whole will affect each member. Change is constant. Or change requires consensus among all family members. Yeah, that's kind of an easy one, right? Yep, good. All right, Mr. P, a normally healthy 43-year-old, is entering the hospital for minor knee surgery. His major adaptive task while hospitalized is, okay, what's the key word here? Keywords. Okay, major adaptive tasks. Okay, well, let's see what we got. Accepting his dependent role, cooperating with the hospital caregivers, managing his absence from work, or D, accepting the diagnosis. B, cooperating with the hospital caregivers? Okay, so you suggest B? Accepting the diagnosis?
or cooperating with caregivers, it could be A or B.
A or B?
Because it's while hospitalized.
Okay.
Because he can't really do anything about his absence report.
Correct, correct.
The diagnosis of a knee surgery may not be a permanent one.
Okay. So, how many people say A? Accepting his dependent role. Okay.
Major adaptive task.
How many say B? Cooperating with the.
Go with me because he's doing physical therapy.
Okay, let's see what it is. Hi.
But I guess
And why did you choose A?
Well, his diagnosis, it says it's minor knee surgery and he's normally healthy,
Uh-huh.
so it's not going to be anything serious.
Uh-huh. So you ruled that one out,
Yeah.
right? And why did you choose the dependent role? Why did you choose that one?
Because he's normally healthy, so he's used to doing things independently.
Oh,
See, but
okay.
wouldn't that go with cooperating with, if he's used to being independent, then wouldn't it be difficult to, you know, yeah, you're still right, it's just.
And it's minor, I don't
Right.
think of dependency, if it's a minor, I would not feel, if I had, I mean, I'm at that, I'm pretty close to that age, and if I had minor knee surgery, I
Mhm.
would feel so dependent, I mean, I'm conscious, so I don't agree with that.
See, and I think it's.
Okay.
and you too.
And the important part is, and the moral of the story is, you don't want to fight with the question, right? Because this might be the one, right, that gets tossed out. So you will have spent 5 minutes on a question that they tossed out, right? So this is a good,
Can you explain why you think that that's the right answer?
why
I
the,
have a really hard time with that.
uh-huh. Well, you have A and B that are very close,
Yeah.
right?
And I would have gone with either one, yep.
Accepting his dependent role is sort of adaptive task.
Oh, the
Adaptive task, and one of the adaptive tasks is accepting his dependent role. Cooperating with the hospital caregivers, yes, but, you know, I wouldn't see that one as strongly linked to
So
adaptive task.
is really the key part in that, then.
Yes, yes. Remember, you really want to look at what are the key words in the question, because that's going to be the key. That'll give you some guides in terms of what the correct answer is. All right? An initial psychosocial assessment should include all of the following information except.
About assessment, yeah.
Yes, all right. Right. Let's see what we got for problem identification, community resources available, family dynamics and support system, or D, client's cultural heritage.
B, because you're not to that point yet. Because you're just assessing the information.
Okay, okay.
I agree.
So we have, any other possibilities? A?
Oh, A is.
Because you're not at the problem, I mean,
Okay. Well, should we see what, let's see what it is. Okay. And why again was it community, why was it? Okay, listen up here, please.
Just because it's an assessment and we're not, like, you're just gathering information and data, you're not quite ready for the resource stage. You want to figure out what the issue is first.
Uh-huh.
And, but you just assessing what's available, but you're not assessing which one to choose. I think the reason A is not,
So
is because
Okay.
there's, the resources aren't done the assessment, like, think of your intake, if you work with neighbors.
We have it on ours, though, that's what I'm saying. You ask, like, what resources do they have available? It's not, you're not choosing yet which ones to do. You're
Mhm.
just asking, you're gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, are you asking, that what Gina just said?
But it might, see, I don't know though, because it's different to every agency, like it might be your individual resources that are available, but it might not be a community resource that's available. Like I
Uh-huh.
have like resources like my family, but that's not a community resource.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of goofy because it's so specific to what, but also we learn that you're not supposed to do on your like your personal specific to your agency, the national schema.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think generally speaking though, I mean, most of the agencies that social workers serve, the reason a person is in front of you is because there is some form of a problem that's caused them to need some assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and generally speaking, I think that would be.
Okay. Okay. Again, these questions are going to always have, you know, those two that are going to be close. Let's keep going through these questions. You would be most concerned about suicide when, okay, what's the key words here? And suicide, right? The client says life is not worth living. The client misses an appointment. The client expresses anger. Or the client gives favorite possessions away. I hear some A's and D's.
I think it means most, it's like,
That's how they say it though.
What he does or what he did, what he says.
What would you be most concerned about?
It better be A or I'm.
Well, let's see.
Or what he says.
Okay, now why is it D? Go ahead. So, there may be, correct, right? There may be people talking about life is not worth living, but that's an action, right? And that's what you'd be concerned about.
They might be just getting rid of purging. They just want to be purging.
Don't know, but you won't want to be, rather be safe than sorry, right? All right, here we go. Alcohol is, okay, let's see if you're right. See what's here. Hallucinogen, stimulant, depressant. See? Yep. Okay. Okay. And that's a recall question, isn't it? Right? But again, that's a great example where you try to answer it before you see the other questions. I mean, the other possibilities. It'll speed up your test taking if you can take a guess before you see the questions or the answers. The best example of primary prevention in the area of domestic violence is mandatory reporting, premarital counseling, restraining orders, or conflict resolution classes in schools. I hear a lot of D's. Yes, primary prevention. Okay? D, primary. Let's see what we got. Okay, and why is it D? It's primary. Okay. Why isn't it premarital counseling?
it's not the best. It's not bad.
People aren't always married.
Well, and it's not dealing with conflict, right? Premarital counseling not necessarily is dealing with conflict. All right, I think we just got a couple more here. A social worker is meeting with the parents of an infant recently diagnosed with mental retardation. Well, this might be an older question. In the initial conference, the social worker should first provide the parents with, okay, let's see what we got. Names and locations of appropriate community education resources. Factual information about the child's specific form of mental retardation. An opportunity to discuss their feelings and ask relevant questions. Or D, a referral to a support group for parents who are experiencing a similar situation. So I hear mostly C's, right? Yeah. See? Very good. All right. Okay. Ethnic culture refers to the culture of the community of people who have a common identity based on a common, any guesses? Common experience? Okay. Well, see what you think. Okay. Okay. History. Religion. Nationality. Or political interest. A history. You go for history. A. How many people would go for A? Okay. A. Okay. Let's see what it is. Yep. Okay. Which of the following is most likely to be a violation of confidentiality? Okay. Let's see what this one is. Discussing the case in consultation, bringing up a case problem in a staff meeting, including a case illustration in a professional journal article, showing a videotape of a therapy group to your students. I see here mostly D's, right? Yeah, you see that? Good job. Okay, a social worker is working with a group of adults in a senior citizen center. One of the clients indicates that she is either going to kill herself or her husband. The threat appears to reflect intent rather than being ideational. The worker should report. To whom? To police? Anybody else? Oh. This is a client that says she's going to kill herself or her husband. Right, it's intent. Okay, let's see what we have. Maintain the confidentiality of the communication. So we can toss this one out, right? We know we have to report. Call the police. Well, let's see what else we have. Communicate with the client's husband, right? Or speak to the center's consultant. B or D? Yeah. So what do we have? How many say,
Yeah, what does that mean?
I think probably the manager then. Oh, wait a minute, you choose the agency, the person over the agency,
so that, call the police? Let's see what it is. Now, did anybody have C? Did anybody vote for C? Why would it be C?
So he can save himself and putting himself in the situation?
You have a duty to warn, and the first person you have to call is the person that's being threatened. There's actually a... Okay. Right. Okay. Yes.
Tatiana Tarasoff was a woman who somebody had threatened to kill her, and the worker didn't report it. Like, that wasn't the first thing they did, so they, like, the person who threatened to kill her went and killed her right away.
Yes. Yep. So.
Yeah.
Tarasoff.
Is it double R?
You know, I wonder if that concept might even be in the dictionary, social work dictionary, possibly. Duty to warn. Yep. See how you're learning things even when you don't get the right answer? All right, let's see. I don't know if there's a few more questions here. A social worker has been assisting a person in securing subsidized, I can't read the, rental assistance. A landlord who has rented to other individuals referred by the social worker asks if the individual has a recent history of substance abuse. In response to this question, the social worker should, yes, they don't have a release, do they? Okay, let's see what we have. Answer the question directly as asked. Secure a release of information from the client. Avoid the question by redirecting the conversation. Or D, tell the landlord the information is confidential. What should the social worker do?
Huh? Landlord is asking you, so in response to that question, you should say D. So you
should say D and then say the human.
Okay, so we're going for D? Yes. All right, everybody get that one? The choice of the social group intervention for bereaved persons is most influenced by the fact that group members can meet other bereaved people, form a homogeneous group, will feel they will be listened to, or D, have a common experience conducive to mutual aid.
Sounds most technical.
It does, doesn't it?
But that,
The most influenced by the fact. Okay, yes, okay. Again, for the purposes of the exam, when they talk about groups, they'll mean social group work. And social group work, mutual aid is sort of a key word. You're going to get linked to that a lot. Okay? An explicit agreement between the social worker and client concerning target problems, goals, and strategies of social work intervention and the roles and tasks of participants is known as a, no? As a, what would be a concept, social work concept? Treatment? Goals? Well, let's see what we have. A contract? A process? Task analysis? Or treatment plan? What's the best answer? Okay. So here A's. Okay, any other ones? Any other possibilities?
Well, I think D, but.
D's?
There's
What?
something else we were born to do. Something, it was something over treatment. Assessment over treatment.
Assessment over treatment, correct. But
But that doesn't really apply. So
doesn't apply here, right? So what are the two are there two that we're debating between?
yeah, A-
Contract and treatment plan.
Somebody over the years have said that like treatment plan was like, those are more of like the we, or one that's a Sorry.
So between contract, how many people say contract,
Don't fight the question.
right? How many people say treatment plan?
Task participants is known as, I think it's treatment.
All right. Why is it treatment plan? Why is it treatment plan?
It specifies the action.
All the problems, goals.
A contract could be a variety of different things, but this specifies out a treatment plan. So this is a more specific answer, the best answer that's available. Does that make sense? Okay. Triage is a marital arrangement. That's a joke. You get that? You get that one, huh? Benefit for the aged. A program based on cost effectiveness in terms of a return on investment to society. No? Well, a medical term for triangulation. Can we toss out any? Okay, so then we got any other ones we can toss out?
No, not necessarily.
No?
Isn't triage like a medical, like where they come in and you treat like the worst thing first? Isn't that kind of the concept?
Yes.
Could be a benefit.
So apply it to social work.
And what's trying,
I would say D.
D? Okay, how many say D?
I'm leaning towards that.
How many say C?
A program based on cost effective.
D, okay, what about C? Any Cs? A few, maybe, sort of? Let's see what it is. Let's see. So it's taking this medical term, but they're applying it to a social work program, aren't they? It's what?
True but not relevant.
Which, D?
Well, no, it really isn't triangulation, that's not what triage means in medical terms.
Yeah, they're trying to mess you up with triangulation. I mean, it has a different, it's a medical term, but not that. So it's a distractor. It's trying to throw you off. Yep. Okay. And there you have it.